Plot twist!
What's up, humans? So, I'm here to celebrate that I did 10 episodes. Woo woo! I'm so excited. A lot of podcasters get into this, and a lot of people don't even make it past 6 episodes. It's definitely a hard thing to keep up with, but luckily, I love talking and I love writing. So, putting those two things together, I sometimes will make tons of notes throughout the week and then set myself up for success so that by the time I get behind the microphone, I've got some things to talk about. Now, I today wanted to talk about something that's easy for me to talk about, right? I'm celebrating 10 episodes. Let's not dive into too much research, and let's dive into the ocean because I lived on a cruise ship for a year. Now, living on a cruise ship is not easy. Sounds really fun. It's like, wow, you just get to live there, but you don't get to really enjoy it like a normal cruise. So sometimes certain performers will get privileges, and I'll get to that. But it is sometimes a scary place to be, and you can feel trapped. So you can kind of get that island fever type of feeling. Not to mention, different things happen every single day that you're on the cruise, and there's still kind of that fear of being in the middle of the ocean, trapped somewhere. And if anyone has seen Titanic, I mean, not gonna lie, had some nightmares while I was on the cruise ship of it sinking. And I'll tell you guys a little bit more about that. Now, when I was first offered a contract, it was for Norwegian Cruise Lines, and I had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship. I thought I was going to get married. I was almost proposed to, and that is a story for another day. But it was an escape for me, and I knew it was the right choice at the time to not be around the life that I had known for so long. I reverted to the Bible as I had a female kind of version of the Bible given to me from a friend because she knew I was going through a hard time, and kind of just had these moments to myself. And we had rehearsals in Tampa, and I met some cool people there, and I just kind of got thrown into this new world. So the cast that I was working with, they're from all over the place. We had some people from South America and from Russia, Ukraine, things like that, Australia. So it's another kind of like those circus worlds where you're just thrown into this culture shock, and it's super cool. But you're also thrown into learning all like so many shows and dance numbers within a short time frame, and then you go on the ship. So I just remember doing these rehearsals, and my body hadn't danced that much. I mean, I danced every day, like I'm in entertainment, but I hadn't done this kind of dancing plus in heels in so long. And I remember actually waking up in the mornings because they would house us during the rehearsals. And I remember rolling out of bed and standing up and literally immediately falling on the floor. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through rehearsals today? Like my calves did not work. You're born with whatever calves you're going to get. You either have Popeye the Sailor Man calves or you've got tiny calves. Like they are one of the hardest muscle groups to work out and grow. So my calves are just a little bit more elongated. So I just feel like that might be why this was just such a struggle for me. So like wearing the heels, working out those legs, it was really difficult for me. But I just remember falling out of bed being like, what am I going to do? And I just had to ice and ice and ice and ice until I pushed through it. And so we learned the show. And I remember I did this one show called Shout, the mod musical. I remember in the rehearsal space crying because I played the role where I was getting married and the girls were putting a veil on me. And I'll get emotional just thinking, oh gosh, I can just put myself right back in that moment. And I was like, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom real quick. And I was like, get yourself together, Katie. Like, we're just rehearsing. Like, this is just acting. This is not real life. But I had almost gotten engaged. And it was so hard for me to like really live that moment and thinking, oh, this is what it could have been like. I could have had my friends around me helping me get ready. And it just felt so visceral. So I remember having a lot of emotional moments. And it was hard for me as well. It was the first thing I ever did that was really harmony work in singing. I'd done a little bit here and there in some shows, but not this much. And a lot of the girls had done cruise ships. Some of them had done 5 years already of cruises. And this was my very first one. So they got to go back to the hotel and party and go to the jacuzzi. And I would like hibernate in my room with my earbuds, trying to memorize my vocals. And I was also very unfamiliar with the show. And a lot of the girls had played these roles on the ship several times over. So this was very, very new territory for me. So I don't know if me hibernating led to some of the girls not liking me, or the fact that a lot of the girls had different schedules throughout the day. You know, some of the singers were mostly separated from the dancers. And while we were dancing, it was like, you know, who got what partner. And then you had to kind of become close to your partner, which I did as well, to my male dance partner. And, you know, just having these like automatic like separations, or the fact that sometimes they'd see me reading this new Bible and not knowing about my personal life, or the fact that I lived in Orlando and I worked for Disney. It could have been a number of things, but I just didn't feel supported. I felt like when I was doing this process, I felt very alone during it. And I was hoping to create bonds with people, but I think it was just a perfect storm. And I remember getting onto the ship, and I just remember such a huge separation. We had a lot of drama with it as well. Like, I didn't know that we were going to be like getting to go back to Port Canaveral, which is really close to my house in Orlando. And I paid like $300 to like ship my suitcases to Europe because we had to board in Europe and then do the transatlantic crossover. And I had no idea that, like, oh, I could have just waited, brought a couple of things, and then I could have just had my mom or like drive to Orlando for the day and like get my stuff. So I spent all that money for nothing. So I was already mad. And I thought that the cruise company was going to pay for it, and they didn't. And I was like, oh, so a lot of different things like that. Not to mention, I ended up doing the wrong medical testing that they require uh, for the like servers, for like the cooks, like the line cooks and stuff. So I had to do like the poop test, which if you don't know the poop test, you don't necessarily like just like transport like, you know, a box of poop, but you do have to scoop your own poop, and it is not fun, and like swish it in a little tube and send it off. And I was like, so I get to rehearsals and I'm like, gosh, can you believe we had to do that? That was so gross. And all the girls are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, like that was the paperwork they gave me. And we had to do like the blood work and the shots and the x-rays. And they're like, yeah, no, we didn't have to do that. And I'm like, what? I was like, they're like, I think they gave you the wrong testing forms. That was for the line cooks. I'm like, oh my God. So I had to go through that for nothing. But whatever. I was healthy. At least I knew something I didn't know before about my body, right? So I had to go through that. So it's just like little things like that that probably made the cast think like I was weird or something. And I just thought I was being funny and open, but whatever. I have no idea what they thought of me, truthfully, because I didn't end up being close with any of them after that. So there's a few people I keep in touch with, but I'll get to that. Here I am about to embark on this journey and sail the high seas, and I just feel alone again. It reminds me of when I joined the circus, and you know, we get to like Lisbon, and I go shopping with one of the Australian girls, and I'm having a good time trying all the food. We go to Copenhagen, and I get to see, you know, some things I've never seen before. And it was just really hard for me because the first day that I was there, I just felt like I was not welcome in this group, and that I was kind of like following them around. And so then after feeling this way during this time, I realized they didn't really want to hang with me. They just felt obligated to. And I remember finally when we're getting on the ship, like they would all just talk to each other, and they would like schedule things and be like, okay, we'll meet at the gangway and da 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 da. I'm like, I don't know where that is. Like, I don't know where anything is. And eventually you do have to take like CPR tests, and you have to learn how to use the hoses. Like, you're part of the crew when you're on a cruise ship. So you have to take all these tests and get certified and things. And that part was fun, working with everybody. I had some fun moments with the cast. I mean, I would laugh with them sometimes, but it just felt like they almost would just be nice to me just to say they were being nice to me, and then go talk behind my back. And so eventually I had to find my own crew. So I started talking and having lunch with, you know, other people, like, and that was also kind of like a mean girl thing. Like, even in like the mess area where we'd go have lunch, like I felt like I was not welcome at the table. Like, and so I really did just start hanging out. And honestly, when I'd hang out with like the boys in the dance group, they always made me feel welcome. And then I really started trying to like learn the Russian language and like understand, like just being around them all the time like helped me kind of learn it. So I really tried to make an effort to learn the language as well. So I know a few words. So that's something great to take away. And if I do see another, person from Russia or Ukraine or kind of around that area, I'm like, oh, немного по-русски, хорошо. I have these little, things that I can say, and it always makes them light up because they're like, oh, and they think I can speak Russian, and then I'm like, no, I'm sorry, just little. So sorry, I don't know a lot, but I think it's just a small, token. It's like when you go visit France, like the French appreciate when you at least attempt the language. So, I think it makes people feel welcome. Not to mention, as an actor, it helps me with my accent because just hearing it really helped me understand that there's no THs and kind of just the inflections and where to put all of those accents. I still have some video that I kept of the Russians and Ukrainians practicing because they do these really cool turns, and turning is kind of like their thing in that like Kazachok style of Russian dancing. And it's just cool. I'm glad that I have that and that I recorded a couple of those videos. And my dance partner ended up being someone that I am still friends with today, that I literally just got off the Instagram with, or any of the new technology that we have today, because we didn't have it back then. We had Skype, but it still was not that great. And we're still friends. And he was someone that I inevitably fell in love with. And it's not a perfect story, but it was very, very romantic. And I would love to put so many of my romantic, crazy stories into a television series one day, because sometimes when I think about it, I'm like, gosh, this is so whimsical and it's so interesting. And I've dated all these different types of men, and it's just cool. Like, I really look back at my life and I'm like, wow, I really lived it. Like, I really had some cool experiences, and it really made me a more well-rounded person. So this one in particular does stick out to me. Like, I dated a Russian, very different culture wise. While I learned a lot from his culture, I think he learned a lot from me and about a relationship in a different way that maybe he had never looked at it before. Now, before I get into the romance of all of that, I, living on a cruise ship is difficult. And right off the bat, I felt discarded. I didn't know how the boarding was going to work. And I know that people probably negotiated certain things into their contract, which I knew nothing about. This is my first contract. And, people kind of knew what the ship was like and wanted to room with certain people. And something shifted, and I ended up, instead of rooming with one of the dancers, which is typically how it goes, the dancer knew one of the costumers, and so they pulled a costumer from a room where they were rooming with someone else. So usually it's like double bunk, so like two people to a room. In the Filipino or the different parts of the ship, you can have like 4 or 5 people to a room. Like, I can't even, like, having 2 was rough. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I just can't. It's so like military, right? It's like, it made me think about the Navy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like just shoving everybody in these quarters, and you're like really low part of the ship, right? And I think I was on the 4th floor, and then there's like a 3rd floor and a second. Oh my gosh, just crazy. So usually the lower the quarters, the more uncomfortable they are. So the girl was like, found out, oh my gosh, my friend's coming on the ship. And so the dancer requested to be roomed with this costumer instead of me. And so then I took her spot, and then I was with some random person on the boat. And I was like, what happened? I thought I was supposed to be with so-and-so. And they're like, oh no, yeah, she requested to be with this other person. And like, her room was like much nicer. Not like much, like it was longer. So there's just more like room, like to move. And mine was much smaller. both still very small. But I was like, oh. And then my room, which is so funny because so I worked at Finding Nemo the musical. I get in there, I meet the girl, and she worked in the kids center, which I can't remember the name of that right now. And she said that her name for the kids was Nemo. So I come in and it says Nemo on the door, and she has like a bunch of Nemo things in the room. I'm like, well, I was like, this might not be what I thought it was going to be. It might not be ideal. I go, but I think this was meant to be. And so I got to know her, and she ended up being super cool. And then she left, and I was like, no. So I ended up getting rotating roommates throughout the entirety of the 9, 10 months that I was on the ship. And I'm like, this is just frustrating. So I went through this rotating room of roommates. I had one girl that smoked in the bathroom, and which is not allowed. And I kept telling her, please go up to deck 6 and smoke like you're supposed to. Stop smoking in this room. I don't like smoke. I don't want to get in trouble. And she would smoke, and like the beads, and I knew when she was lying to me because first of all I could smell it. She'd try to like cover it up, but then like you could see these like yellow beads of water after a shower because she would do it like in the shower, like formulating on the roof, and I knew that she had just done it. And she'd always come drunk to the room. I would try to leave like magnets on the door or like symbols like, hey, if I'm busy, be quiet when you come in or something, or if I'm sleeping. And she would just always be a mess. And no matter how many times I tried to have conversations with her on like, hey, we're living together, can we work on this? Like she would take advantage of the things that were mine in the room and be like, oh, can I have this? Like I snuck a coffee pot on, which I guess you're not really supposed to have one, a coffee pot in my room. And she would be like, well, can I make coffee? Because I don't want to go up and get some. I'm like, oh, okay. So you'll be nice to me when you want something, which a lot of people do, but not when it's, something that I need or ask of you. It's close quarters. And if you are bunking with people and then their rooms are also bunked, it's very difficult to have intimacy on a cruise ship. So, unless you are fortunate where you get a larger cabin, which most of the singers did, and you have a full size bed, then you don't really get these sexual opportunities as much. Or you do, and crazy stuff happens. So that's why we tried to have codes. Or I had like a dry erase board. So if like I missed somebody, since you don't really have a phone, like you don't really have internet access and you pay for your internet and it would never connect. It would take me 10 minutes to connect to the internet and then it would kick me out and I had to pay for every one of those minutes. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like I didn't even use it and I have to pay for this. So I just got used to, hey, I'm not going to have this until I get off ship and I can go to Starbucks and use the Wi-Fi, which is what most people did, because they could totally give it to us for free, but they don't. So we also had like a cruise ship credit card that we would use. So if we bought things, you put the money on that, and then that could come out of like your paycheck or however you want to do it. So little things like that. But we did have an understanding. You try to with your roommate, like, hey, I might have this guy in here tonight. So can you not come back until 9 or something? Okay, yeah, no problem. And then my bad roommate would not care or she would forget because she was drunk. I don't know. And then she would come in. I'm like, really? I'm like, ugh, like, come on. And so she would, barge in there. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So it's tough. And like it's weird. So you have the bunk beds and there's curtains on the bunk beds. So that's your privacy. So you like literally, they hang from the wall or from the bottom of the bunk and then you just slide them together. So you try to hide behind the curtain, but like it's really difficult to shove two people in this like barely twin size bed. So you really try to make it a home, but it's not easy. So you really do resort to putting in earbuds while people are getting it on. People do things next to each other because at some point you just don't care anymore. I mean, think about like people in like concentration camps and things like that. They just in jail, right? How could they ever poop next to someone? At some point, you're just like, whatever. Like, this is the way it is. So you try to find privacy where you can get it. And most everyone knows your business because of this, because you can ask, and I don't know what is with the gossip on a cruise ship, but it is the worst I've ever seen it. Like gossip on a cruise ship literally gets nothing is private on a cruise ship. Everybody knows your business. Some people brag about it and some people really try to have a private life, but it's really impossible. Like you can ask and ask, like, please don't tell anybody about this. This is a private matter, and they don't care. They'll get drunk and they will tell somebody. So then there's the like the crew drinking area, which the name of that is escaping me right now as well. But that would be where you could get discount alcohol, and that was kind of where people would go if they really wanted to socialize. Because technically, we're not supposed to be up where the passengers are. I want to be where the people are. So yeah, you're not really supposed to be up there. You can also get in trouble for sleeping with a passenger. So you're not supposed to have any kind of relationship with a passenger, nor are you allowed to go to their room, or are they allowed to go to your room. And I actually got in trouble for this because I walked a passenger to his room and they caught me on camera. And the next day they're like, did something happen here? I'm like, no. I'm like, I just had a really good time off ship with them and then came back. And he also wanted to see my room, but I knew he wasn't allowed to. And he was trying to actually come downstairs to my room and follow me from one of the bars. And a Filipino guy like yelled at me and was like, I'm going to tell on you. I'm like, are you kidding me, bro? I'm like, even if I was going to bring this person like down to my room or whatever, I'm like, why? What is with these tattletales? I'm like, come on. Like, I'd watch out for you. I wouldn't care. Like, people need to mind their own business. I'm like, this life is hard enough. I'm like, that you need to be tattling and telling somebody on me. I'm like, whatever. So you really didn't get, a lot of privacy on the cruise ship. That was like the worst part about it. I'm like, gosh, I feel so dehumanized. I can't even like have whoever I want in the privacy of my own cabin. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. And I understand, like, as far as like, don't use the jacuzzis, like if you're sitting at a bar, allow a guest to take the seat, things like that, because they're paying for the cruise, so of course they should be. And actually, as an entertainer on the cruise ship, a lot of the passengers love to meet the performers and they want to get to know you and they like to talk to you and all that stuff. And then you also have side duties. So a lot of the side duties are like library duty, which is like, why do they have libraries on ships? I'm sorry, but like, really, you're gonna read a book? Like, I feel like, okay, it's one thing to bring a book that you were like in the middle of reading and that you were really interested in, but like to seek out checking out a book on a ship, I'm like, what? Like, what are the odds that they would have the book that you want anyways? I don't know. I guess people can spend the time how they want to. But with devices these days, like Kindles and Nooks and stuff, like it's just, I feel like it's kind of obsolete, but whatever. They also have like games in the library so people could come in and play chess and things like that. And I guess those types of areas are nice, I suppose, if you are doing a transatlantic or you're out to sea for a couple of days, and there might not be as much to do. But the cruise is usually pretty good at providing entertainment during those days as well. So you would sit there and help people check out books, or you do door duty. So if you're not in one of the shows and say it's a magic show, instead, then you could either help the magician, you could get paid extra for doing that, which I did do that on the cruise ship, or your door duty to, hand people programs, tell them where their seats are, things like that. Welcome to the show, enjoy the show, lots of different things like that. And some cruise ships have more duties than others. And depending on what role you are, you might have less or more depending. Usually the singers had more privileges than the dancers, which I don't know who decides that, like who decides a singer is better than a dancer. They're both valuable. So I don't know how somebody does that, because I was both a singer and a dancer. So I kept thinking, so then why am I not getting more? I'm doing both jobs. I'm not just one. I'm not just contracted as a singer. So I always thought that was strange that they preferenced certain performers over others. And you would learn about different ships' duties, because the cool thing is all these ships, they kind of port together. So sometimes I'd get really excited if somebody who was on a Carnival ship or a Royal Caribbean ship and I happened to know someone else that was on that ship, we'd port in the same location. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I got to see a friend of mine in Cozumel, and I was like, just obviously I was going through a hard time with like my cast that I was with, and just to see him was like, oh my God. Like, I just ran up to him. And it's cool because you kind of feel like once you get back on land into your real life, and you find out like people kind of went to the same places. Like, oh, I went to No Name Bar in Cozumel all the time. Like, you feel like you're part of this like private metaverse that only like you guys have experienced and know about. So when you get back on land and you find people who've been to similar spots as you, the same as travel, it's cool. You're like, you were there too, you know? And so, yeah, you would hear from the other performers and like what their contracts were like and what they were expected to do and things like that. So that's how I learned about it. And, you know, every cruise ship is different. And I feel like ours was a little bit more lax than some of the other contracts that I have heard about. So I guess I was lucky in that sense. But I also had nothing to compare it to because it was my first time ever cruising. And I think that was the hard part for me. I didn't have anybody, and there was a couple. They were actually a couple together that left the contract. Before we even got on ship, and they just had some personal issues, and you know they wanted to get married and start a family. So there's more to it than that. And they had done contracts before, and I was sad because I really liked them, and I was like, no. But so I kind of like lost the people that I really liked, and you know, I just felt like everybody kind of knew what was going on, and nobody wanted to help me, and I was very much by myself, like, hey, where's this? How do I get here? And then like doing everything in military time and even learning the lingo and starboard and you know, just all these things. And it was interesting and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't second nature to me yet like it was for everybody else. And sometimes I felt sabotaged, you know, like sometimes I'd be late to like a rehearsal and they're like, "Where were you?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand this or I didn't know where this was." And they'd look at me like I was just the worst person ever. I'm like, "I promise I'm responsible. I don't know this stuff yet." And the assumption that I'm supposed to. And like a lot of things were late. Like I didn't even have a pair of shoes the entire contract. Like what is that? Like I should have just gone off ship somewhere and found myself a pair of shoes, but like I had to borrow these old shoes and they would like spray paint them and I tried to find like insoles to make them fit my feet. Like they were always like a half size too big. And just things like that. Like I, you know, always had these like things that shouldn't have been an issue happen to me on the ship. And just miscommunications constantly. I mean, we had turnovers of different stage managers and changing cruise directors. And it's just really hard to keep up because the changes on a cruise ship happen so frequently. I mean, even one time the cruise director changed our embarkation for sail away, and every week had been 3:30, and we're just like, cool. So we have, and you're supposed to be there half hour before, so we weren't late, but we were right when the ship is supposed to be like, peace out, you know. And they were like calling. It was me and Ildar, the guy that I was dating, Ildar, the Russian barbarian, I used to call him. And we were late and we were like, unbeknownst to us, we're like, what are you talking about? Like, you didn't see the sign when you walked out, which, like, yes, are bad. There's a sign, but like, we never look at it because it was always the same schedule every week. So that's usually for just the passengers as a reminder. And so we got back on, they're calling our names on the thing. Our, you know, our show director is like, where were you guys? We're like, I mean, we just walked on. Like we literally were just laying on the beach and then we just came back on. And so then we had to go meet with the cruise director and we got written up and I like framed that crap. It's like in a scrapbook somewhere. And I'm just like, I just thought it was funny. And I was like, I'm sorry. You know, like I get it. It's a big deal. And they made it a big deal and it'll never happen again. I'm so sorry. You know, and you can't really talk back to them. So, you know, and we had like a meeting before, like when you go in there, just like yes and no and just nod your head. I'm like, okay, you know. And then me and Ildar had a laugh and had a drink later on. And, you know, it's cool because the drinks on ship are very cheap. So, like, and I became like addicted to Strongbow cider on the ship and the dry kind, like the real kind, not this golden apple stuff that they replaced. It's too sweet, people. I'm like, cider was already sweet. I'm like, so this extra sweet stuff, and now you can't get it anywhere. But it was only $1. And so I had that, and you could get like a whole bottle of wine. And that was cheap too, you know, kind of ranged between like 8 to 15, depending on what you got, and just get a bottle. And then you could bring that to your room and have that. People do karaoke, especially the Filipinos. We do karaoke down there and have karaoke nights. And it was just a place that, you know, the crew could hang out and you know, enjoy cheap drinks. So I went there often. And that was a way that I was able to, you know, commingle and get to meet other people that on the ship. And the Filipino parties were awesome. I remember even sometimes some of the performers didn't know about them. They're like, "Where were you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I was at this awesome party." And I'm like loud music and food everywhere, and it was just a really good time. So I got to see different parts of the ship uh, because I was kind of forced to not just stay in a clique. And then I earned a lot of respect actually from a lot of different people on the ship because a lot of times entertainers can be looked at as holier than thou, that they're better than everybody because they usually get better quarters and they're treated differently, especially by the passengers and things like that. So, I learned to respect them. They respected me. Oftentimes, like even the bartenders would be like, "Oh, we know Katie. Like, let's hook her up or something." Just different things like that. And we didn't have, that many food privileges. We did have to eat in the mess most of the time. They did give us turkey on Thanksgiving, I remember, but if it ran out, it ran out. So, they could only really give you a little bit. And there's two sides to the mess. And one side always had more Filipino based food. Like they had a lot of fish heads and things like that stuff that there's just no way that I was eating. And so one side was always more fishy than the other, but it was always the same stuff every day. So I got really bored of the food. And then you could pay like a passenger and you could upgrade if you had time. So if you had time, you could pay like the extra $25 fee and then go to a nice restaurant and enjoy dinner. And then that became a thing sometimes too, because, we would sometimes decide to all go as a cast. Or if it was someone's birthday, and sometimes you weren't invited to somebody's birthday dinner, and you'd find out about it because it's a small cruise ship, and then that would feel weird. And then the next day at show, people would be talking about, "Oh my God, we had so much fun last night," and you're like, "Oh, well, I wasn't invited to that," So it was very segregated at times. But I do remember Ildar surprised me and took me to like the French restaurant, and we had escargot, and I wore a red dress, and we were like by ourselves walking on the ship. And I remember it was super windy, and he was like calling me his lady in red. And he tried. It's like, what do you do? It's like, I'm gonna pick you up at your door and walk you to dinner upstairs. It's so you try to make things as romantic as possible. And we'd find little places that we could to have quiet moments. And there's cameras all over the ship. Like I said, they're always watching you. So, and the entertainers would be watched like hawks because since we did get some passenger privileges, they would watch us all the time, which I hated that. I'm like, this is like Big Brother. Could you not be watching me? Like, literally no privacy unless you are inside your cabin. And even then, like I said, because you live with someone and your door, it's like a dorm, right? You're right next to this other person. Everybody knew who was in your room at what time, and there's just no privacy. So there was no, I mean, people cheated like a lot. People had affairs, people cheated, people slept around. I just picked one Russian my entire contract, and we had a very interesting relationship. And your cocktail of the day is the White Russian, served in an old-fashioned glass, on the rocks. 5 parts vodka and 2 parts coffee liqueur with 3 parts fresh cream. Stir slowly and enjoy. So, why am I doing this Friends transition music? Well, first of all, Friends is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. And Joey Tribbiani reminds me of my Russian Ildar. And to this day, he will still send me references and he'll just send me like memes of Joey. And he looked like him. And then, he was a bit at times misogynistic and cocky. And I kind of taught him the how you doing thing. He wasn't 100% familiar with Friends, and I kind of introduced it to him. And then he's like, "Oh my God, Joey's so funny." And so then he just never stopped saying, "How you doing?" So even if we were fighting, sometimes he would just like make a Friends reference to make me laugh, and then we would get over it and be all lovey again. But we went through a lot when we were on the cruise ship. Ah, the romance of a Russian. Also extremely tumultuous was this relationship. But it just always has like a piece of me. It wasn't like I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing, just without making poor choices like to your body. But we were just so back and forth. And like I said, you know everything about everybody, like on the cruise ship. So I would find out if he had hooked up with somebody else or, where he was the other night. And he would find out where I was the other night or who I hung out with that day. And there was a language barrier issue at times. And sometimes what he meant to say didn't come out right, or he said exactly what he meant. Like, he told me I wasn't really that beautiful and I was just more cute. And I'm like, okay, thanks so much, And then he'd brag about like the women in Russia and how tall and beautiful, and you'd break your neck if you looked at them. And I'm like, this isn't something a girl wants to hear. And there was a time when, first of all, he was my dance partner. So after the couple left, because that guy was my dance partner, and she was one of the singers. So after he left, I ended up being put with Ildar for most of the time because he was shorter, and I was one of the shortest dancers on the ship. And which was awesome. Like, usually I would not be contracted. It was very rare that you could be a dancer on a ship and be my height, which is only barely 5'1". And so we became very close because of that. And I remember one time during rehearsals too, uh, he's like, why can we go to the, see, I can't do a Russian accent that well. I can speak the words if need be, but not just the accent. But he's like, I want to go to the CVS and get a syringe. He's like, I need some like cortisone to inject into my body. I'm like, you need to go to a doctor for that. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? In Russia, you could just go to a store and get a needle. And, there's just certain things that like, we're different. And so he would teach me a lot about his culture. He was also into history. So he was very good at knowing, had a Soviet Union flag, and like he knows about all these things, and he's open-minded, but he's sort of into conspiracies, just a little bit. Not super crazy, but he tries to really look into everything. So we would watch like documentaries together, like in his room. Like, it wasn't like we were partying all the time. Like, we really did try to learn a lot about each other, but he was also used to his culture, and he did have a wife, and holy moly, like legitimately one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen in my life. And Ildar always fluctuated. His parents were heavier, and he always kind of struggled with his weight. So he was always working out and, taking care of his body. And, he loved dance. He loved to teach dance. He also could play guitar. And he's just a very multi-talented person. He could sing a little bit, and I remember I have this video, and he has it too, but just in our rooms with the Russians and the Ukrainians, just like playing guitar and singing this machine, like this, Russian song, and laughing. And it was really good times. Just these like little intimate moments, and, really learning about people. It's not just like, look at me, I'm partying, I'm awesome. Like, I really took the time to like get to know people. And that's just part of my personality and who I am anyways. But, so yes, he was married. And I remember during rehearsals, I didn't know she was never brought up. And then finally one of the girls was like, yeah, I think he's married. And he was like hitting on me a lot. And wasn't just me. I mean, he hit on whoever was there, which I realized was like a culture thing. And so finally I'm like, don't you have a wife? And this is like straight out of my relationship. So I'm just like mad, I'm just mad at men in general. I'm just like, what is wrong with you? And he's like, yeah, can you help me pick out something for my wife from Victoria's Secret? I'm going to mail it to her. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what is this guy's situation? So eventually I did learn what the situation was. And he would brag about her, and he'd show me pictures. And at some point, I thought she was made up. Maybe she is. Maybe to this day she was made up. I have no idea. But this girl was drop dead gorgeous. No, she wasn't made up, because I did see their wedding photos. And Ildar's always been that really chummy personality. He laughs at everything. He's very talented. He's kind of a show off. And he was short, and he did stand out, and he also explained to me that in his culture, he would be an outcast sometimes, and some people didn't respect him, or he would be criticized because he had a background that was different than other Russians. So he was actually considered like a mutt, and he was a mix of like a Mongolian descendants called the Tatarians. I think I'm saying that correctly. And so he would be shunned sometimes. Like people were like, oh, I don't like those kinds of people, kind of like a racist thing. Very prejudiced. And so he had to deal with that growing up and being super short. Like a lot of Russians are really tall, but it was great because then he became like a tricker. So he actually got to learn these crazy tricks, and he did a lot of like acrobatics. And so he would be featured a lot on these like nationally televised, events, especially in Russia. And so it was pretty cool. I saw a lot of the videos that he did, and he was a dance instructor, and he got to meet a lot of really well respected dancers in the Russian industry, and so he was popular, and you could see his wedding was like a hoopla. I mean, I always say be careful of the hoopla. I always tell everybody that. I'm like, if you're surrounded by like a lot of, groups of people and you feel like I'm in this moment, we all have a lot of great friends. I'm part of this clique and this group and this industry. Sometimes you can get distracted by the hoopla and you're not necessarily focused on the person that you're about to share life with. And you can be distracted by the hoopla around you. Like if you join a new job or a new dance troupe or whatever, and sometimes you kind of lose yourself in the camaraderie of it all, that you're like, wait, I'm going to be with this person for the rest of my life. I need to make sure that we work together first. So I think this might have been their mistake together. I mean, I don't know her from Adam. I've never met the girl, never talked to the girl, never seen her on social media, nothing like that. And I think I had only been on Facebook for a year at this time. It was newer to me, and just getting to learn all of those social aspects. So it's not like when women really got used to social media, they would like stalk each other and check out, their competition or anything like that. Plus, I'm not really that kind of person. So I didn't really understand much about it. All I knew is that he kept kind of pining after me and being Rico Suave towards me. And I'm like, what is your deal? And at some point, I gave in. I got to know him better. And at some point, I did give into it. And it took a while. It wasn't like immediate or right away by any means. And, I kept kind of fighting with myself on it because I'm like, well, I am, alone on the ship and I'm kind of here on the rebound, after being in my 4-year relationship and how that ended. But, I battled with myself, and I hadn't found anybody else on the ship. And I was like, well, I've got needs too. so, so eventually I kind of did give in to him. Not right away. I mean, it wasn't like, let's just go do it. It took some time to do the bigger things, but the smaller things grew into bigger things. And I learned about her, and she was in a dance company as well. And Ildar had done like 7 cruise ship contracts. So this was like his life. And you started learning that a lot of people on the ship worked there and then sent money home to their families. And this is like huge in these cultures because a lot of the American jobs pay better, and the overseas jobs, obviously. And, different taxes and things like that, and just how money gets shipped around. It's just sometimes being on a boat, it's going to be a little bit easier to send money home and get the most of your work. And so most of these people were away from their families. And so, of course, they had affairs. Of course, they cheated. And I was so against this. I'm like, what is the deal? And he's like, let me explain. He's like, she's off with another guy, and I've been away from her for almost 3 years. I'm like, well, when was the last time you saw her? He's like, a year ago. I'm like, is this even a marriage anymore? I'm like, I don't even understand. And he's like, well, like, we write to each other and I send her gifts. And he had a daughter from a previous relationship, not a marriage. And she apparently, to what he says, was kind of a nightmare. And so they don't have a good relationship, but he did have a daughter. And so I really encouraged him to focus more on that. So anytime that we'd go out somewhere, I'm like, you need to get this for your daughter. Send this to your daughter. Have you spoken to your daughter? And I'd always push him. I'm like, you're going to regret it if you don't. And, he saw my heart with those things. And eventually, he realized he didn't really have a relationship with his wife anymore. And that was kind of what justified it for me. Like, I wasn't the one having the affair. It wasn't me breaking the vow. And I knew that there was no foundation there anymore. And she was also off with somebody else. And no, it's not right. It's still not right, but it's my story. And we ended up falling in love with each other. And so we had some issues. There was times where he made some poor choices, and he did, I guess, quote quote, cheat on me. And I found out through other, performers on the ship. And like I said, everybody knows everything. And he lied to me about it to my face. And he like acted like he didn't lie to me about it. And then what happened was I ignored him. Now, on a ship, 1 week is like a month. So everything is just a little bit different there. Everything is so much bigger of a deal. So I didn't speak to him for 3 weeks, which felt like 3 months. And he was my dance partner. So I saw him like every day. And like I said, it took me a while to trust him. And then when I finally trust him, and I even like I made like ground rules. I'm like, if you're going to be with me during this, I'm like, you can figure out your marriage later. He said he was going to go home and divorce her, and it was over anyways. I'm like, great. I'm like, but I don't want us to be like all these other people on the ship. I don't want to be sleeping around and doing all this stuff. Plus it's like unsafe, and I just don't want to do that. Granted, like you get tested. I'm like, you don't know if someone like went off ship, did something, and came back on ship. I'm like, you only get tested the one time. So we made an agreement, and then he broke that agreement. And so I stopped being his friend. I stopped looking at him. I made sure I was nowhere near him, and that I would only work with him. So imagine like dancing with somebody in a show, and sometimes very intimately, just like avoiding eye contact or like squeezing one another just a little bit harder to let them know, or like partnering. He just kind of like pushed me more. And it was hilarious. I mean, we would end up laughing sometimes. Like literally we would both start busting out laughing sometimes because of how aggressive we were being with each other, just like dancing. And we're like, this is ridiculous. And so 3 weeks. And I remember he walks by me in the hallway on our floor, and I'm going to rehearsal, and we happened to pass by each other. Like I was pretty good at avoiding him, and he stops me and he's like, so just we're not even friends anymore. And I'm like, no, Ildar, that's what happens. I was like, when you cheat on somebody, I was like, no, we're not friends. I'm not talking to you anymore. I was like, you made a choice and you made a bad one. And I said something to that effect. And he was just like so dumbfounded. He's like, we're not even friends. And I'm like, no, why would I be friends with you? And so then like I walked away, and he was so sad. It was so funny. And one day he comes to my door, and he has like a box of chocolates, and he gives it to me, and I'm like, thanks. And I like slam the door in his face. I'm like, oh, you think he's like, I got you chocolates. I'm like, oh, you think that's going to fix the fact that you slept with someone else? I'm like, absolutely not. And then we had to do like duties together, like doors. So we'd be like across from each other. And like normally you're supposed to like kind of like be in touch with that person. And one day he was late, and like normally I'd like throw him a bone and like call him and be like, you're late to doors. And then like he shows up late and he gets in trouble. He gets written up. And he's like, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, you're not my responsibility. Like just things like that. And so I went up to one of the band leader's rooms just to make him jealous. I didn't like the guy. He was my friend. But he got so drunk. I mean, just drinking vodka from the bottle. Like this guy got so drunk. He's walking around on the floor in his like sweatpants with no shirt on. And then he's like stumbling around for hours. He didn't know where I was. And so this is like, I don't know, 3.5 week marker or whatever. He just can't handle it anymore. And I come downstairs, and he's like, where were you? Were you at, so-and-so's, the band leader's room or whatever? And I was just like, yeah. What's it to you? And he's like, oh, fine, you slut. And he just starts calling me these names. And I'm just like, playing hard to get. I'm like making him think something happened when nothing happened. I went back to my room. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you would leave notes. And I decided to have this system where if I missed somebody, that they could leave dry erase notes on my board. So sometimes I'd get like little secret admirers. I had a secret admirer for like a month and a half. I didn't know who it was. It was actually really fun. And they'd leave me notes every day. I'm like, who is it? And so anyways, so then we had this battle. It's one of my favorite memories. And he's just, oh my God, he's calling my room. He's running over. He leaves me a note on my door that's like slut. And I'm like, oh, okay, you want to mess? And it's like U-shaped. So like, imagine that like all of the rooms are like parallel, and I'm on one side of the U, and then you go down the hall and you take a left, and then you go up the other side of the U. So he's like directly across from me, like parallel, but you can't get there unless you go down the hall, down the side of the U and then cross over. And so we're running back and forth, back and forth. And he's writing slut and I'm writing, man whore or whatever, like on his doors. And we're just going back and forth, back and forth. And I take my shoe off and I throw it at him down the hall, like try to hit the back of his head. And I hit him and I'm like, oh. And I literally react like, oh. And he turns around with this like angry, like if I'm holding a red flag, he's the bull. Like he is going to charge towards me and he comes huffing and puffing and he's stomping at me barefoot and he's coming at me and he like puts my arms up against the wall and he starts to like I don't know. Like he's like about to like hurt me, right? So he's being like really aggressive. And then he's like yelling at me in Russian. And then I'm like, stop, stop, stop. And then I like take the marker that's in my hand and I write on my own hand and I put like, I heart you. And he sees it and then he starts like busting out laughing. So I don't know if he had his hand over my mouth. I can't remember. It was very, very dramatic. I mean, like cinema movie dramatic. And I like write like, I heart you like on my hand. And then he starts laughing and then he just like collapses. And then we end up going back to my room and we're laughing. And he's like, can I please talk to you? I'm like, yes. So we go in my room and he's huffing and puffing. And then he like sits on the floor and he starts like circling the floor with his hand. And he's like, I just don't know. I don't know how I feel. And actually, I think that might have happened the following morning. Either way, this might have been actually on debarkation at like 6 a.m. the next morning that he actually finally had the conversation in my room. But either way, he came in and I remember this was like the most vulnerable I've ever seen him. And he sat on the floor and I just never really knew how he felt about me because he was so back and forth. And I understand he was going through it too. Like he knew he was going to be leaving his wife and she was off with some other guy. And I know he didn't know where he was supposed to be. And like a lot of times in his culture, he's like, that's what we do. We send the money home, we put the food on the table, and they don't, don't ask, don't tell. The girls don't ask, and men cheat. And I've always done that. And I've done 7 cruise ship contracts, and this is what I do. Okay, well, I'm different, and I'm going to teach you how to respect women. And that's kind of what it came down to. And I think that's why he fell in love with me because I didn't put up with that crap. I was like, I'm not putting up with it. You don't get me. You don't get to have me, And so I just remember he came in and he just sat on the floor and he's like circling his finger on the floor. And I knew it was really hard for him to like say what he was going to say. And he told me that he was in love with me. And I was like, oh my God, like for real? Like it was so hard for him to say it. Like, and he just really like opened up about it. And then we hugged each other. And then like, I just remember like in that moment, my roommate came in, she goes, did you guys make up? Are you guys okay? And I was like, yes. And we're like crying. And like Ildar was crying. It was really cute. And she's like, oh, I'm so happy for you guys. And I'm like, whatever. I'm like, who knows? Maybe he'll cheat on me next week. But I was happy in the moment. And from that day on, he decided I will not be with anybody else for the rest of the contract. And he wasn't. And like I said, this happened like later in the contract. So like we had been like, still getting to know each other, like trying to decide what the rules were going to be. Then we were together. Then he cheated. And then we ended up just only being with each other for the rest of the contract. I was like, I don't want to be with anyone else. I don't want, I know everybody on this ship already. I'm like, I'm not even allowed to hook up with passengers. Like if that was the case, then things might be different and I might want to be single. I'm like, but I like you, And so after the contract was over, I'll never forget, like we have such cute moments together, like just off ship. And there was times he was a complete douche. Like he didn't want to spend time with me. I always wanted to do something fun. Like I got us a free excursion to go swim with the dolphins and he didn't want to go. And I said, who are you? And I was like, I don't understand your stubbornness. I was like, why do you want to just sit here? He's like, I want to work on my photography. And I'm like, he just wanted to edit his photos all day. And he always just wanted to get off ship to use Wi-Fi. And I'm like, well, I like quality time. I want to spend time with you. And I didn't know about the love languages back then. And maybe that would have been something I could have spoken to him about, before. But he just didn't always want to do that. He was a task guy and he wanted to like finish his tasks and focus on his craft and all these things. And, and sometimes I just felt neglected. And I'm like, fine, I'm going to go out and do this. And I'm like, what kind of person says, no, I don't want to go on a dolphin excursion? I'm like, fine. And so like I found a girlfriend of mine to go with me. And then I had these cute pictures. And then I came back and I go, hi, I had an amazing day. And I like knocked on his door and I give him a gift. I'm a gift giver. A cup. And it's like a Mexican like I don't know, like a engraved glass, like different colors, like really festive. And he opens it up and it has a dolphin on it. And he immediately starts laughing because we were fighting about it. I was like, who doesn't want to spend time with their girlfriend? Like, I don't even get you. So then, he starts laughing and I was like, have a nice day, and like stormed off. And I was always very thoughtful in that way. And he knew that. And that's always like what he loved about me. Even when he was stubborn and mean to me, I was always just kind of there understanding. I understand this is kind of part of your personality. Understand that we like different things. I'm like, but ultimately I love you and I would like to spend more time with you. So then, like I said, he would do little things like, take me out to a dinner or something on the ship or whatever. But when the contract was over, it was legitimately one of the most saddest days I had ever experienced saying goodbye to a person. Like, it felt like he died. Like, you're living with this person every single day, and then I knew I would never see him again. And I know that even though I wasn't close with the cast, like, the cast knew. Like, they knew how close we were, and we all kind of had to do our airport stuff together. So I remember being in the Orlando airport, and I lived there, so I had different kind of privileges. Like, my car would be parked there and people would be like, oh, Katie, can you drive me places, and I'm like, I got a car. Yeah. So like anytime that we'd port in Canaveral, I'm like, I could drive wherever I wanted, and people would try, all of a sudden people wanted to be my friend, and I'm like, should have been nicer to me. And I remember one time Ildar, also in Port Canaveral, took me to like a Russian restaurant, and like we would have like legitimately a shot of vodka for breakfast, with like beet soup, like borscht soup. And it was attractive to listen to him like speak the language, and I'd let him drive my car sometimes, and I have a video of him and he was like so scared and he's like laughing. He always had this like little giggle, and I was like, look at you driving, because like really didn't, I mean, think about it, like people don't drive for like over a year, they're living on these ships, so he was kind of like nervous driving, plus he didn't have an American license. And so going back to the airport, so all of the performers, it's like everybody's saying their goodbyes, and some people are just flying to another state, and he's flying back to Russia. And we ate there and we waited, and I know some of the performers saw us like say goodbye to each other, and I mean, I couldn't, you couldn't walk people all the way to the plane anymore, and I just said goodbye to him at security. And I remember we were right by the Chili's and leaning on this like big white like support pole. And so every time I see it, I think of him, because I go to the airport a lot. And I just remember just watching him walk away. And it was like that, like, Stewie moment from Family Guy where they like imitated like the Hulk walking away. And I'm just like, oh my God. And he's just walking away and I'm just crying. And he keeps turning back and looking, and then like legitimately fades off into the distance, and that was it. We hugged and were around each other as long as we could. It's like, it's like you learn someone's smell, and like and you're used to being in their arms and just seeing them. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm not gonna like wake up and see his face, and I'm not gonna see him anymore. And gosh, just takes me right back to that. And so then we Skyped. That was what we had. We had Skype, and the connection wasn't always the best, but I thought like I was so in love with him, and I really thought like I was going to move to Russia at least for like a year or something, and I was willing, and I really thought he was going to propose to me, or at least like take advantage of me to be an American citizen, like get a green card or whatever, and he didn't want to. He wanted to stay in Russia with his brother and his parents, um, and work on his craft, and he did. He ended up starting a dance company that was very successful, and he always sends me videos. And um, you know, I uh, I don't know. I know he loved me, and I know that like to this day, he has admitted to me that maybe he regrets not choosing me. And there still is a language barrier, so I never get like a full like explanation of anything, but like I'm like, you do like love me, right? And he's like, well, yeah, but like I don't want to be there. I'm like, okay, well, okay. So then it was weird because then like I kind of had to end it from my own heart. Like I had to stop talking to him for a while because I'm like, well, then I need to move on. If you're not going to come here for me and I'm not coming there, then and we're not going to move forward with this relationship, then we will be friends if I can in the future. But right now, like, I have to move on. And I remember I moved on. I started dating this military guy. And he was so jealous. And I'm like, and he kept messaging me, "Oh, you're with this guy?" Did it? I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Duh, I moved on. What did you think I was going to do?" And then he went on like some like circus tour, and I'd ask him like, "Oh, who you hooking up with?" And like, I knew like, and I would like get it out of him. So like, I knew he was hooking up with women and stuff like that. And like, that's how he was. I'm like, and I'd always just call him like, "Oh, you're the George Clooney," like not anymore George Clooney, but like, you're just a gigolo. You just want to be single and jump around from girl to girl, and like, you are a gypsy. That's what you want to do. And eventually I just accepted that about him, and I moved on with my life, dated and had different relationships, and eventually got married. And after that time and me getting over him and just kind of here and there keeping in touch, my wedding day, he actually had his Russian dance troupe sing me a song on my wedding day, which I thought was super cute. And he thinks my husband's really cool. And he even said, "I feel like we kind of look alike." They're both like more stout kind of guys, and tan. And um, so, he's like, "I'd love to meet your husband." He's like, "You should come out to Russia and I'll be your tour guide." And so, things have been how they are, but I know he still loves me and cares for me and has expressed some sort of maybe, oh, what could have been type of a thing. But that was the choice that he made. And at least, like, we still have a friendship or whatever. Um, and I do feel awful because he is out in Russia, and he's like, "I don't really know what's keeping me here anymore," because during the pandemic, like, entertainment kind of went away. And then both his parents died and his brother died. And it's just terribly devastating and so sad. And he's got some friends over there, and he's got like 3 huskies, and living his nature. He's always been about nature and life, and resourcing, things from nature, very holistic type of guy. And I just feel for him, and I'm always going to have like a place in my heart for him. And I want him to find somebody. I want him to start a family, and like, whether, I mean, maybe not have kids at his age, but like at least have someone to live his life with. So yeah, I still care about him. We are still friends, but ultimately we were not meant to be together. And I do think that he had some, jealousy issues. Like, he's one of those people, like, do as I say, not as I do. And like I said, I taught him a lot on how to be a better man, for sure. And he taught me a lot of things. He's a very smart guy, very, very intelligent. And he has a good heart. He cares about people. He does a lot for others, even though sometimes he can be selfish in other ways. But I am ultimately so grateful for the friendship and the relationship that we did have, and what I learned from it. And now I have a lifelong friend, and we don't talk as much as we used to. We check in with each other. We'll make jokes about the old days and things like that. And he'll still send me a Joey meme every once in a while. And I think we wouldn't have worked out together. I think it would have been tumultuous. I think, there's something that was oil and water for us, that it didn't stick. But, at a distance, we can appreciate and love one another. And, I always say, I think it's strange when you meet a woman who like hates all of their exes. I start questioning that person. Same thing with guys. I'm like, it doesn't matter which way it goes. It's just like, you have to be able to at least appreciate something from the relationship. Like, otherwise you're just immature. Like, you know, unless they did something completely awful to you, burned your house down or cheated on you a million times. Even then, sometimes I can forgive people. I guess I'm just much more forgiving for, people's indiscretions, and just for being immature. And that's really what it's about, is about growing and trying to learn from your mistakes and how they affect people, and taking ownership of that. But I loved my Russian romance, and I probably there's a lot I left out, but I will probably write either a TV series or a book about it one day, maybe book to series. We'll see what happens with it. But cruise ship life is not easy. I definitely think everybody in the entertainment industry could experience it once or twice, and it is a great paying contract, and usually the shows are really fun to do, and you can have some really fun off ship experiences. You'll meet all kinds of different people, and as long as you try to stay out of trouble, don't get left. Because they will leave you stranded. I've heard some stories. They will leave you. They will just peace out, and then you got to find your way back to the ship, or you're just canceled from your contract, and they're like, good luck to you, good luck getting home. But it is an interesting life, and it's beautiful too. Like I said, the transatlantic could be really rough and rocky. There have been storms, and I'm sure you've seen videos on YouTube of dishes clashing to the ground, and things breaking, and it can be scary. It can be scary out there in the pitch black darkness, but it's also beautiful. And sometimes I would just take a blanket and go up there and lay down and look at the stars, because there's no light pollution, and it was beautiful. And I also have this awesome memory. Remember, I brought up the Titanic earlier and dreams and whatever. So this happened to me. So I was bunking with Ildar, and he was on the top bunk, so we had to like step on Vladimir to get to the top bunk, and sleeping in this very tiny, barely twin size cot. And I was woken up by the anchor dropping. So his room was right where the anchor dropped, and I wasn't used to it. And it was so loud, and I was dreaming, that I woke up and freaked out. And I was like, the ship is sinking. The ship is sinking. Oh my God. And I'm like legitimately saying this out loud and panicking. And he starts like yelling at me in Russian. And then he's like, and he's like trying to like change his language. He's like, English, Katie, it's okay, nothing's happening. And I'm like, like I legitimately thought the ship was sinking. So that was a very funny but scary memory. And as far as the shows go, there is that whole thing with sometimes the ship would move, and then you'd have to kind of catch yourself. But for the most part, you don't feel it as much as you think you would. So that's good. But like there would be times, you go to do a leap, and then the floor meets you. You don't meet the floor. Just because it's moving so much. But all in all, it was an interesting experience. As far as the relationships with my cast goes, it's actually pretty incredible, because I did have somebody reach out to me recently, and it's been over 10 years, and they apologized to me, and actually we met up and had dinner, and they bought my drinks and my food, and were actually really cool. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could have gotten to know this person. Or admittedly, she's like, I've grown up a lot and whatever, like been through some more life. And she was younger than me. I think she's 5 years younger. I'm 4 years younger than me, I don't know, and was much younger at the time, of course, and went through her own stuff. And an apology is never too late. And I really do think it showed me that an apology is never too late, because I totally accepted it and was like, thanks. I feel like I've been waiting for this apology. It's like there's certain things that, like, I don't know, that you in the back of your mind that you just like can't let go. And now I'm like, wow, like I can just like push that away and be like, because not that she spoke for all of the other girls, but kind of. I mean, it made me feel like I could kind of put that story to bed and like let it go. And then I'm not crazy, and that like, I really was, treated unfairly in a lot of different ways. I mean, I just different things too. Like we had like a Motown night, and I really wanted to like sing in the Motown. Like I love the song Grapevine, but this one girl, she was extending her contract, and she was singing that song. And I was like, great, when she leaves, I'd love to sing that song, because everybody else was like assigned like a solo, but I wasn't. And so then when she was finally leaving, I asked, and, this girl was actually the vocal captain at the time, because another girl turned it down. And so I asked her, like super nice too. I was just like, hey, I was just wondering, like when Mel leaves, I was like, I'm not really doing, anything in the Motown thing. I was wondering like if I could do it. And she's like, no, I'm taking that song. I mean, like sharply was like, no, I'm taking this. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, what about this other song? She's like, that one too. And I'm like, okay. And so at that moment, I just said, I'm not going to be doing Motown at all. First of all, you don't get paid extra to do it. And I was like, you guys can do it. I'm not going to be a part of this. It's extra work anyways. Peace out. Like, this isn't going to be fun for me if everybody's going to act like this and be like selfish and not like a team player. So, I remember too, like a couple of the girls got sick and they're like begging me, Katie, can you please come up? And I went up for one night. And I remember the band leader and a couple of the band members were like, oh my God, it was so nice having you. And oh my God, you sounded great. And it just made me sad because like I wanted to be a part of so many of the things on the ship and I was just kind of pushed out of them, you know? But yeah, so, you know, just things like that, you know, one of the girls, when we had like a gift exchange, bought me a Mickey Mouse onesie. I'm like, she's like, you know, because like you work at Disney. I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean I collect Disney things. I just grew up here and I happen to work there. Like, what is the deal? It's not like I ran around like bragging about my like shows and everything I do at Disney. I'm like, give me a break. Like, it was just a part of my life. Like, I had a job there, big deal. Like, that was what I did, you know? So I just, you know, little things. I remember crying on the back of the ship before show started. Like, some of the girls said some really mean things. And, you know, and also it's like, some of the girls would like do really bad, like cheat on like whatever guy they were with. And like, I couldn't keep track of it. And so like, I remember one time I said something out of turn, like, oh yeah, you know, I know that so-and-so went off, you know, to be with her boyfriend. I'm like, I know it's really cold up there and da 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 da. Well, I guess she was supposed to be in Australia. And he's like, what do you mean cold up there? I'm like, in Canada. She's in Canada. I didn't know that she was keeping some secret from some other guy. And everyone's like, oh my God, and people are like defending her, you know, like, I know what you did. And I'm like, what did I do? I don't understand what's going on. They're like so mad at me. And I'm like, I can't keep track of all y'all's love affairs. I was like, truthfully, I was like, you guys are sitting here judging my one that I have. And I'm like, and I can't keep track of what you guys are going through. And, you know, and it's just like I would get blamed and then they'd all cheat on each other anyways. And I'm like, I don't understand this. I'm like, and they're all still friends with each other. It was very confusing to me. But I just remember like crying on the back of ship before like the top of show. And I think one of the girls ended up feeling bad and she came to talk to me. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'm just really tired of being treated like this outcast. And it's just really hard for me. And I'm really doing my best to be nice to everybody. And I'm trying to follow what's going on in everyone's lives, but it's really hard, you know? So yeah, I felt very isolated and, I thought about going back and having a new experience, but I think that one just kind of was too hard for me. And I was like, it's time to move on to new things. And that's how I've always been. I'm like, this chapter is over. What's next? And I'm happy that I live my life that way and I don't get stuck in one place too long. So that is the end of this story, but there'll be more to come. This has been Katie Rose, served straight up with a twist. This podcast is produced, hosted, and edited by Katie Rose, a Rosebud production. Catch my follow-up Fridays on YouTube, where I respond to your YouTube comments on any thoughts or questions relating to each week's episode. It gives you a chance to have a more intimate conversation with me and opens up the door to new topics. Find me at my YouTube channel, Katie Rose, straight up with a twist. And remember, if you're thinking it, I'm probably talking about it.